Before we can do our bias bound seam, we need to cut it out from this pattern piece. So again, I have this in our class binder. You take one of these and trace it out. So you use your push pins into the table. Trace along the outside. Remove the pattern piece and add 1/2 inch seam allowance. Now that I have my bias binding piece cut out, I also need a piece of bias tape. So we have this spool of bias tape, 1/2 inch. It opens like this, and then it has another fold here. It's called double fold bias tape. And so I need a piece of it as long as my seam. I can just set that aside. Open the bias tape and pin to muslin piece, matching the inner fold of the bias tape and the stitch line. So we know that this pencil line is our stitch line, but then also on the bias tape, this inner fold here is going to be our stitch line. So you're only going to have this little baby amount to manipulate around. But what's cool about bias tape is that because it's cut on the bias, the whole thing is stretchy and curvy, and you're going to be able to put it on this without any bunches. This bias tape, this inner fold is going to be your stitch line. So I'm going to line up my stitch line here, right side to right side. Now I've got my piece pinned on right side to right side on my stitch line. Do a regular stitch, back stitching at both ends. Great. And now I'm going to clip the seam allowance along the curve. Clip up to, but not through the stitch line. Then I'm going to take this and fold the bias tape around the seam allowance. I'm going to go up and over. Yeah, tuck it inside of there. I'm going to take my folded edge and go just past the stitch line, like in continuous lap placket. So I'm going to just beyond the stitch line. And I'm going to pin it in place there. From the right side of the garment, because I'm going to go back to the outside and I'm going to stitch along the previous stitch line. So right in the ditch. So that means I just need to pin it from the outside, making sure that I'm pulling my bias tape just beyond the stitch line. This is a way to finish off an edge. So say you have one layer of fabric and you want to finish off the neck edge. You have a couple of options, and one of them is this. It also gives you an opportunity for a piece of contrast trim, and the option of keeping your garment only one layer of fabric. Say it's like a really lightweight flowy silk or something. You don't want to have to end up lining it with something and ruining the drape of the fabric. So putting a, whoops, I missed it totally on that one. Gotta make sure I pull it past the stitch line. It's a junky pin. I'm gonna blame the pin. Here we go. But like I was saying, if you have a thin fabric that you want to keep thin, you don't want to put a full lining in it. This is a good way of finishing off an edge, because you can't just leave a raw edge. It'll unravel. It'll lose its shape. Then you'll have like a stretched out neck or armhole. How unsightly. So now I have it pinned from the right side of the garment in the previous stitch line. So now I'm gonna stitch in the ditch. Line up my needle with the previous stitch line, back stitch at both ends. Trim my threads, and I am in the ditch on the outside, and on the inside I have just caught the bias binding and have now encased this edge of the garment. And that's your bias binding sample.